Hello friends, welcome to the world of Chhuti Presents, Escape into Audio Stories in English. Today we'll read the stories from the book named Boyhood Days, written by Rabindranath Tagore. This is one of the translations from Rabindranath Tagore's renowned autobiography, Chhelebela. And this translation was done by Miss Radha Chakravarty. In the introduction of the book, Nobel laureate Mr. Amartya Sen mentioned, "This is an odd book. Boyhood Days is Rabindranath's own account of his early childhood, written by him at a ripe old age, shortly before his death. His recollections are invariably sharp, and yet, as Radha Chakravarty points out in her translator's note, not in all cases in line with those factual matters on which other evidences exists. And yet, who better than Rabindranath himself to give us a glimpse of his life as a child? In fact, much the most interesting parts of his autobiography relate to his young mind. What the child Rabindranath thought, what ideas aroused the young boy, what he made of the world around him, his family, his city, his country, his globe, and what the school-age Rabindranath found sad in that world and in need of change. Many of those diagnoses would stay with him through his entire life. On these matters, there are no competing sources of real knowledge, and indeed, the picture that we get from Tagore's recollections is both gripping in itself and deeply insightful in giving us an understanding of the adult man that would emerge from those boyhood days. In the translator's notes section, translator Miss Radha Chakravarty mentioned Boyhood Days, or Chhelebela, as it was called in Bengali, is a sequence of reminiscences spanning the period from Rabindranath Tagore's earliest memories to the time of his first visit to England in 1878. The present translation is an attempt to approach the text of Chhelebela in its entirety. Tagore's preface as well as the poem The Boy have been included. While choosing an idiom suitable for younger readers of today, I have also tried to preserve the flavor of the particular ethos that the original text seeks to capture. Many Bengali terms have been retained where the context does not make their meaning clear. Supplementary information has been provided in the last section of this book. Translator of this book, Ms. Radha Chakravarty, teaches literature at Gargi College, University of Delhi. Her translations include Crossings, Stories from Bangladesh and India, Chokher Bali, Farewell Song, Shesher Kobita, In the Name of the Mother, 4 Stories by Mahashweta Devi, and Kapal Kundala. She has also compiled and edited Body Maps, Stories by South Asian Women Writers. Boyhood Days, written by Rabindranath Tagore and translated by Radha Chakravarty. Chapter 1. I was born in old-time Calcutta. Raising clouds of dust, hackney carriages would speed through the city, the horses' skeletal frames lashed by cord whips. There were no trams, no buses, and no motor cars. Those days, life followed a leisurely pace, spared the breathless pressure of work. Having inhaled a stiff dose of tobacco, chewing pan, the babus would leave for office, some in palanquins or palkis, others in shared carriages. The well-to-do would ride carriages emblazoned with their family titles, the leather hoods overhead resembling half-drawn veils. In the coach box rode the coachman, turban tilted at an angle, and at the back were two grooms, no less, yak-tailed fly whisks swinging from their waistband, startling the pedestrians with their street cry, "Hey-yo!" Women, too shy to ride in carriages, ventured out in the stifling darkness of closed palkis. Never, in sunshine or in rain, would they shield their head with an umbrella. If a woman was seen wearing the long, loose semis or even shoes, she would be accused of aping the Mem Sahibs, a sign of utter brazenness. If ever a woman came face to face with a man from another family, her veil would instantly descend over her countenance down to the very tip of her nose, and she would turn back on him, biting her tongue in shame. They went out in closed palkis, just as they lived behind closed doors at home. The wives and daughters of elite families would travel in palkis covered with an additional pall made of thick diamond-patterned linen. The palkis looked like walking graves. Accompanying the palki on foot would be a bodyguard, the darwanji, armed with a lathi. The darwans were supposed to remain stationed at the portico, guarding the main entrance of the house, to finger their beards, to deliver money to the bank, and women to their paternal homes. And on auspicious days, they take the lady of the house for her holy dip in the Ganga, closed palki and all. When hawkers came to the door with their display boxes, our Darwan, Shivnandan, also received his share of the profits. And there was the driver of the hired carriage. If dissatisfied with the bakra or his share of the spoils, he would engage in a ferocious quarrel in front of the main gate. Our pahalwan or strongman, sweeper Shobha Ram, would from time to time contort his body to practice wrestling moves, exercise with heavy weights, pound hemp for his drink, or consume a horseradish, leaves and all, with great relish. We'd go up close and scream Radhe Krishna into his ears. The more he protested, throwing up his hands, the more stubbornly we persisted. This was his strategy for hearing us pronounce the name of his family deities. The city those days had neither gas nor electricity. When kerosene lamp appeared, we were amazed at their brilliance. At dusk, the attendant would go from room to room lighting castor oil lamps. Our study was illuminated by a shade, a lamp with a double wick in a glass bowl. In the dim flickering light, our tutor, Master Moshai, taught us the first book of Pyari Sarkar. I would yawn, then become drowsy, and afterwards rub my eyes to stay awake. I was repeatedly reminded that Master Moshai's other pupil, Shotin, was a gem of a boy, extraordinarily serious about his studies. He would rub snuff in his eyes to ward off sleep. As for me, the less said the better. Even the terrible prospect of remaining the only illiterate dunce among all boys would not keep me alert. at 9 in the evening, half asleep, my eyes heavy with drowsiness, I would be set free. The narrow passage from the public area to the inner quarters of the house was screened by Venetian blinds and lit by dim lanterns suspended over. Crossing it, I felt sure I was being followed. A shiver would run down my spine. Those days, you stumbled upon ghosts and spirits in stories and rumors, in the nooks and crannies of people's mind. Every so often, the nasal wail of the Shakchunni, the nocturnal spirit, would cause some maidservant to collapse in a fainting fit. That female ghost was the most temperamental of all, and she had a weakness for fish. There was also an unknown standing figure, straddling the dense almond tree to the waist of the house and the third floor cornice. There were many who claimed to have sighted that apparition, and no dearth of people who believed in the story. When my elder brother's friend laughed off the matter, the servants of the house were convinced that he knew nothing about religious faith. Just wait till the spirit wrung his neck one day. That would put an end to all his learned wisdom. Those days, the air was filled with terror, which had spread its net so wide that just to place one's feet under the table was enough to make one's flesh crawl. There were no water taps then. In the months of Magh and Falgun, on barks or shoulder-bone yokes, bearers carried kolshis, rounded water pitchers filled with water from the Ganga. Inside a dark chamber on the ground floor, in row upon row of enormous water vessels, the year's supply of drinking water would be stored. It was a well-known fact that the spirits who secretly inhabited those damp, gloomy spaces on the lower floor had huge, gaping mouths, eyes in their chests, ears like culoes, the flat U-shaped basket used for husking puffed rice, and feet that faced the wrong way. As I crossed those ghostly shadows to reach the private garden of the house, my heart would heave in terror, adding wings to my feet. Those days, at high tide, the waters of the Ganga would flood the channels that lined the streets. From my grandfather's time, a share of those waters was reserved for our pond. When the sluices were opened, the foaming tide would descend like a waterfall with a babbling sound. The fish would try to swim against the current. Clinging to the rails of the southern balcony, I would gaze at the scene in fascination. But the days of the pond were numbered. One day, cartloads of rubbish were thrown into it. As soon as the pond was filled up, it was as if the mirror reflecting the green shadows of the province had vanished. The almond tree remains, but there is no trace now of that ghostly spirit, though there is still space enough for him to straddle. Now we have more light, both indoors and outdoors. Hello friends, with this we are ending the chapter 1 of the book Boyhood Days by Rabindranath Tagore. For more stories, please stay tuned to Chhuti Presents Escape into Audio Stories in English.